Usually when we talk about a massive architectural failure, there's this expectation of a really spectacular, obvious reason for it.
Right, like an earthquake or something.
Exactly. You picture a massive sinkhole opening up under a skyscraper. You look at the rubble, and the engineer just points at a visible fault line and says, well, there it is. The ground split open.
We definitely crave that kind of undeniable external force to explain a disaster, It brings a strange sort of comfort to us.
Yeah, we inherently want the cause of a failure to be proportionate to the scale of the destruction. A huge collapse should require a huge dramatic reason.
It absolutely should. But then you step into the world of high-level academic writing, and suddenly that comforting logic just completely disappears.
It really does. We're looking at a landscape of utterly collapsed essays in this deep dive, and the cause isn't an earthquake at all.
No, it's completely microscopic.
Right. We're looking at a profound structural failure that happens invisibly, just, sentence by agonizing sentence, until the whole thing just caves in on itself.
It is the absolute definition of a self-inflicted collapse. And the source material we are unpacking today really highlights something incredibly striking about this phenomenon.
Which is that the people building these failed essays are not novices.
Exactly. They are not beginners struggling to string a basic sentence together.
And that's the paradox that makes this so fascinating for us to explore today. The source specifically targets advanced learners.
Right, people with a massive C2 level academic arsenal of vocabulary.
Yeah, we are talking about highly intelligent people who know incredibly complex, nuanced English words, but who still manage to construct failing essays in major university gatekeeping exams, exams like the TOEFL or the IELTS.
They have all the premium building materials stacked up on the construction site, yet they cannot build a house that actually survives an inspection.
So true. And to truly grasp why this happens, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the people conducting that inspection, right? The exam graders.
You really have to understand the grader's perspective. The stakes for the test takers are incredibly high. We're talking university admissions, visas, career advancements, but the reality for the grader is much more mundane.
Yeah, you have to imagine this examiner sitting at a desk surrounded by literal or, digital stacks of essays.
They are not settling in to read your essay like a beautiful piece of literature with a cup of tea on a Sunday morning.
No, they are exhausted. They are reading thousands of these essays every single week.
And because of that exhaustion, they are actively hunting for specific, highly predictable mistakes to penalize.
They operate with a strict checklist of flaws, don't they?
Absolutely. When you grade that volume of writing, you become ruthlessly efficient at spotting the cracks in the foundation. You do not have the time or the mental bandwidth to try and figure out what a student meant to say.
You only grade what is actually on the page. Which brings us to the central metaphor from our source material today, and it's a brilliant lens that will guide this entire conversation.
The house analogy?
Yes. Writing an academic essay is exactly like building a house. Your vocabulary words or all those fancy C2 level terms you spent months memorizing, those are your bricks.
Right.
But your logic, your cohesion, and your structural discipline, that is the mortar holding those bricks together.
And the harsh, inescapable truth of academic writing is that a house without mortar will inevitably collapse. It doesn't matter how expensive or shiny the bricks are.
You could memorize the entire Oxford English Dictionary, but if the structural integrity isn't there, the exhausted grader is going to knock the essay down and fail you.
So we need to inspect this building process from the ground up, identifying what the source calls the 15 fatal flaws.
Exactly. Our roadmap for this deep dive is in 3 stages. First, we're going to analyze those raw materials, the specific words you choose.
The bricks.
Right, the bricks. Then we will examine the mortar, how those words are fused together. And finally, we will zoom all the way out and look at the overarching architecture, which is how you interpret the blueprints of the exam prompt itself.
Let's start at the absolute micro level then. When we look at the individual words advanced students choose, a clear psychological trap emerges right away.
The urge to sound smart.
Yes. It's a dangerous, almost overwhelming urge. The test taker prioritizes sounding like a seasoned intellectual over the actual goal, which is simply communicating a clear, logical idea.
And this desire to project sophistication constantly backfires. It destroys the academic tone. It manifests most clearly in a trap the source calls the thesaurus salad.
I love that term.
It's so good, right? It paints such a vivid picture of just a chaotic mess.
The concept of the thesaurus salad is quite literal, and it is driven entirely by imposter syndrome.
How so?
Well, a writer is sitting at their computer, they look at a perfectly functional, basic word they've written, let's say the word big, and they feel this wave of insecurity.
They think, oh, the word big isn't impressive enough. The grader's going to think I have a limited vocabulary.
Exactly. So they right-click the word, open up that dangerous digital thesaurus drop-down menu, and they just scan down the list for the absolute longest, most complicated synonym they can find.
And they drop it into the sentence without possessing any real understanding of its nuance or its historical usage or its natural context.
The source material gives a hilarious yet tragically common example of this.
Oh, the elephantine one.
Yes. A student wants to say, the government made a big mistake, but they let that insecurity take over. They right-click, and they end up writing, the government made a gargantuan elephantine mistake.
An elephantine mistake? I mean, to a native speaker or a trained grader, reading that is like hitting a speed bump at 60 miles an hour.
It's completely jarring.
It really is. An elephantine mistake implies a mistake that literally possesses the physical characteristics of an elephant. Like, it might have a trunk and tusks.
Right. It is a salad of random, mismatched words tossed together purely for show.
You can almost see the gears turning in the student's head, assuming that a longer word automatically equals a higher score.
But in linguistics, the way words interact with one another is called collocation. Certain words naturally belong together in the English language, and others violently reject one another.
To me, this is exactly like over-seasoning a dish.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Imagine you're making a simple, elegant potato soup, but you want to impress your dinner guests. So you go into your pantry and you bypass the salt and pepper.
You go straight for the top shelf.
Exactly. You grab every single expensive, exotic spice you own. You throw in saffron, white truffle oil, star anise, cinnamon, and lavender, just because you bought them at a high-end market and they cost a lot of money.
And the result isn't a gourmet soup. It's an unpalatable, confusing mess that you have to throw down the drain.
You prioritize the individual cost of the ingredients over how they actually interact to create a cohesive flavor profile.
So when a student catches themselves reaching for the linguistic truffle oil, what should they do instead? How do we fix the thesaurus salad?
Well, the source dictates a strict rule. You should only deploy an advanced C2 vocabulary word if you deeply understand its exact context and its collocations.
Graders are not looking for obscure words. They're looking for precise academic phrasing.
So instead of a big mistake or an elephantine one, you write a severe miscalculation or a profound error.
Severe miscalculation. Those are definitely advanced C2 level words.
But they fit perfectly into the sterile, objective environment of an academic essay. They are the right spices for the dish.
They elevate the tone without breaking the reality of the sentence. Now, this urge to be dramatic, to perform for the grader rather than inform them, bleeds directly into another massive trap.
Oh, you're talking about the very beginning of the essay.
Yes, we see this constantly in the first sentence students write, a flaw we can call the grandiose hook.
The grandiose hook. This is one that I think almost everyone is guilty of at some point, in their academic career.
Oh, absolutely.
We are taught in middle school and high school that the introduction of an essay needs a hook to grab the reader's attention, to reel them in.
But because advanced learners want to sound profoundly philosophical, they resort to these sweeping, massively dramatic cliches.
The ultimate offender, the one quoted in the source and just dreaded by graders worldwide, usually goes something like this.
Yep.
Since the dawn of time, humanity has struggled with the concept of technology.
Since the dawn of time.
You read that, and you expect a booming movie trailer voiceover to kick in.
Right. And when a grader reads that sentence, their immediate reaction is a heavy sigh and an eye roll.
He's just so tired.
Not only is it an exhausted cliche, but as the source astutely points out, it is factually absurd.
Yeah, if you think about it logically, early hominids at the dawn of time were not struggling with the concept of digital algorithms or screen time.
They were struggling with finding fire and avoiding saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly. The reason students fall back on these sweeping theatrical statements is that they fundamentally misunderstand the genre of academic writing.
Academic writing does not require theatricality. In fact, it actively rejects it.
When you open with a Hollywood movie trailer line, it ruins the academic tone immediately.
It signals to the grader, This writer relies on unprovable drama rather than grounded, observable facts.
I remember doing this exact thing in college philosophy papers, trying to sound like I was writing an epic novel instead of a midterm essay.
We've all been there.
So if we strip away the drama, how do we write an opening sentence that actually works?
The fix requires embracing simplicity and objectivity. Start your essay with a direct, observable fact about the current state of affairs regarding your topic.
The source provides a fantastic alternative to the dawn of time nonsense, doesn't it?
It does. You simply write, in recent decades, the rapid proliferation of digital technology has fundamentally altered workplace dynamics.
That is clean, it is accurate, and it is highly professional.
It doesn't overpromise.
Yeah, it feels like stepping into a well-lit, organized office rather than a dimly lit theater.
And it establishes immediate credibility with the grader. You are laying down a solid, perfectly square brick. You are telling them, I am here to analyze reality, not write fiction.
But sometimes, in an effort to avoid being overly dramatic, students swing completely in the opposite direction.
Oh, yes. They become so robotic that they commit a flaw known as prompt parroting.
This is a massive trap, especially for test takers staring at a blank screen while a timer counts down.
Prompt parroting is the act of blindly repeating the examiner's exact prompt back to them in your introduction.
Let's say the exam software gives you the prompt. Do you agree or disagree that students should wear uniforms?
A panicked student will start their essay by writing, I agree that students should wear uniforms because...
They are just echoing the question back into the void. And on a human level, I understand why they do it.
It's a natural instinct.
We do this in conversations and business meetings all the time, to buy ourselves a few seconds to think. If someone asks me a tough question, I repeat the question slowly to give my brain time to formulate an answer.
Right, but why is it such a fatal flaw on paper?
Because the source highlights a critical, unbending rule of exam grading. You get absolutely 0 points for words that you did not create.
The examiner knows the prompt. They wrote it.
The testing software literally flags those words.
Yeah.
If you waste 20% of your introduction copying their words verbatim, you have wasted precious real estate.
And demonstrated 0 independent language proficiency.
You are handing the inspector a brick that they themselves manufactured and asking them to be impressed by it.
The only viable strategy here is the art of paraphrasing. You must take the core idea of the prompt and completely reconstruct it using your own academic syntax.
So how do we translate, students should wear uniforms into a C2 level original thought?
You elevate the vocabulary while maintaining the core meaning. You write, implementing a mandatory dress code in educational institutions is highly beneficial for several reasons.
Okay. You have swapped students for educational institutions, and you've elevated uniforms to a mandatory dress code.
That translation process proves to the grader instantly that you have command over the language.
You have the tools to manipulate and reshape English, rather than just hitting copy and paste.
Now, this panic that causes prompt parroting, the fear of the blank page, and the ticking clock also fuels another incredibly common structural flaw when it comes to the bricks we choose.
I know, yes.
Word count padding.
Exactly. Or as it's universally known, fluff.
Fluff. The desperate inflation of a sentence. This is entirely driven by the strict constraints of the testing environment, isn't it?
Mostly, yes. Students are often facing a minimum word count, say a 300-word requirement.
They glance at the clock, they glance at their essay, and a cold sweat breaks out because they realize they are 50 words short and completely out of ideas.
So they start shoveling hollow filler phrases into their sentences, hoping the grader won't notice that the essay is mostly just air.
The source provides a really painful example of this. A student wants to say because, but because is only one word.
So instead of because, they write, due to the fact that it is widely known by society. It is exhausting to read. It feels like you are wading through waist-deep mud just to get to the actual point of the sentence.
And a trained examiner sees right through it. They know you are just padding the word count.
To fix this, advanced learners must embrace a concept that often feels counterintuitive to them, which is the economy of words.
Yes, in high-level academic writing, conciseness is a supreme virtue.
The goal is to convey complex, nuanced ideas in the most efficient way possible. You want dense bricks, not hollow ones.
The source suggests replacing those long, agonizing, fluffy phrases with sharp, precise C2 adjectives or adverbs.
Like taking the clunky phrase, it is a thing that happens everywhere, and replacing it with a single, powerful word. ubiquitous.
Deploying one sharp C2 word like ubiquitous demonstrates far more linguistic mastery than 12 words of hollow fluff.
Graders would infinitely prefer to read an essay that is dense with meaning and tightly edited, even if it is slightly on the shorter side.
Absolutely. Rather than a long essay filled with hot air, it shows confidence.
It really does. It shows you don't need to hide behind extra syllables.
Speaking of confidence, this brings us to a fascinating flaw regarding vocabulary, and one where I actually think students get very confused.
The final flaw in our raw materials category, right? Using what the source calls the absolute absolute.
Yes. The absolute absolute refers to the dangerous habit of using words that leave zero room for exceptions. We are talking about boxing yourself into a corner with words like always, never, completely, all, or everybody.
Now wait.
Precisely. They think using the word always makes them sound like a strong leader. But in the realm of academia, using an absolute is actually a massive logical fallacy.
How so? Why is saying always a fallacy?
Because an absolute statement is almost always impossible to prove, making it incredibly easy to destroy. Let's take your example.
Yeah.
If you write the definitive sentence, technology always makes people lazy, you have just made a massive sweeping claim about billions of people.
I've built a massive target on my back.
You have. The grader only has to think of a single solitary exception to completely invalidate your entire paragraph.
Wow.
If they think of someone who used technology like a smartwatch or a fitness tracker to train for and run a marathon, your statement that technology always makes people lazy is proven demonstrably false.
By using that one word, you have made your argument incredibly fragile. You have invited the grader to penalize your logic.
I like to think of it as building a glass house and you're handing the grader a stone and daring them to throw it.
That's a great visual. So what is the crucial academic skill you must employ to fix this?
It's called hedging.
Hedging. Like planting thick bushes around your argument to protect it from attackers.
That is a perfect visual representation. Hedging means deliberately softening your claims with adverbs of frequency and probability.
It's the absolute hallmark of high-level intellectual maturity, isn't it?
It really is. Look at peer-reviewed scientific journals. Scientists rarely say a study proves something. They say the data suggests or indicates.
So instead of the fragile glass house of saying technology always makes people lazy, what does the hedged version look like?
You introduce nuance. You write, technology frequently makes people lazy. Or, to use an even more advanced structure from the source, a heavy reliance on technology tends to reduce physical activity.
Tends to. I really like that. It sounds much more measured, much more observant.
It sounds like you are analyzing a trend rather than screaming a dogma.
And critically, it is bulletproof. A grader cannot easily argue against a trend.
Exactly. They cannot say, well, I know one guy who ran a marathon, so you are wrong, because your statement already accounts for outliers and exceptions.
By softening the claim, you ironically make the argument significantly stronger and much harder to attack. It proves to the examiner that you grasp the complexity of the real world.
Okay, so we've successfully audited our raw materials. We know to avoid the chaotic thesaurus salad, the theatrical grandiose hook,
The repetitive parroting, the hollow fluff, and the fragile absolutes.
But as we established at the very beginning of this deep dive, a pile of perfect bricks is just a pile of bricks.
It is not a house.
If you just stack bricks on top of each other without anything to bind them, a stiff breeze will knock the wall over.
We have to transition from analyzing individual word choices to understanding how those words must be fused together to create a load-bearing structure.
Which brings us to the second phase of our architectural inspection, the mortar.
The structural cohesion of the essay.
If the first phase was about picking the right materials, this phase is about the engineering required to stop the essay from literally buckling under its own weight.
And the most common structural collapse happens in what the source calls the laundry list paragraph.
The laundry list paragraph represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what a body paragraph is actually designed to do.
Students often operate under the misguided belief that quantity equals quality, don't they?
They do. They think the more reasons they can cram into a paragraph to support their argument, the more persuasive their essay will be. They value breadth over depth.
They just open the floodgates and throw everything at the wall to see what sticks.
And the result reads exactly like a hurried grocery shopping list.
Let's look at the example from the source material. A student is tasked with arguing the benefits of reading.
Instead of analyzing a benefit, they write a paragraph that says, reading is highly beneficial because it improves vocabulary, reduces stress, helps you sleep better, makes you smarter, and teaches you about history.
Okay, they just rattled off 5 distinct, massive claims in a single sentence, but they didn't actually explain the mechanics behind a single one of them.
And that is exactly why the grader penalizes it severely. A list shows absolutely zero analytical depth. Anyone can memorize a list.
Graders do not want to see a barrage of claims. They want to see that you understand the mechanism of an idea.
They want to see the connective tissue that proves how A leads to B.
So how do we force an advanced learner to abandon the grocery list mentality? How do we fix the laundry list?
You have to dramatically, almost uncomfortably, narrow your focus. The rule here is that you should pick only 1, maybe 2 reasons per body paragraph. That is it.
But you must flesh that single reason out completely, right?
Yes. You state the reason, you explain the exact mechanism of how it works, and you provide a detailed, tangible example that grounds it in reality.
Let's apply that to the reading example. Instead of listing 5 things, you isolate just 1, reduces stress.
You start by stating that reading lowers anxiety.
Then you explain the mechanism, like how the intense cognitive focus required to process a narrative forces the brain to disengage from daily cyclical anxieties, thereby lowering cortisol levels.
And finally, you provide an example of substituting doom scrolling on a phone with reading a physical book before bed to improve sleep quality.
That structure shows immense intellectual depth. It proves you can sustain a single line of thought and defend it comprehensively, which is the entire purpose of an academic essay.
You're building a solid, thick wall instead of a flimsy, hollow one.
But even if you build a solid paragraph, you have to connect it to the next one, which leads to another massive structural collapse.
The invisible transition.
This is a flaw that physically exhausts the person reading the essay.
It creates a tremendous cognitive burden on the grader. An invisible transition happens when a writer jumps erratically from one complex idea in a sentence to a completely different idea in the next sentence, without providing any kind of logical bridge or warning.
The flow of logic just abruptly snaps.
It is like walking through a house, opening a standard door in the living room, and suddenly you're standing in the garage or on the roof.
There is no hallway, there is no spatial relationship between the 2 rooms.
And when that happens in an essay, the exhausted grader has to stop, back up, and try to figure out how these 2 thoughts relate to each other.
Are they contrasting? Are they building on each other?
Graders despise having to do the heavy lifting to figure out your logic. If the connection isn't explicit, they assume you don't know what it is.
So we need to build those hallways. We need to install clear signs. The source discusses the power of signpost words to fix this disjointed experience.
Signpost words are the advanced logical connectors that serve as the GPS for your reader.
We are talking about words like furthermore, conversely, consequently, nevertheless, or notwithstanding.
These are not just fancy vocabulary words you sprinkle in to boost your lexical score. They're essential structural tools.
They explicitly dictate the exact relationship between 2 sentences.
If I start a sentence with, consequently, I am not just using a big word. I am giving the grader a specific instruction.
You are telling them the sentence you are about to read is the direct, unavoidable result of the sentence you just finished.
Exactly. You are holding the reader's hand and guiding them safely through the architecture of your logic. You remove all guesswork.
Now, this next flaw is one that I absolutely love. Just for the terminology alone, it sounds like a paranormal investigation.
The ghost pronoun.
Yes, the ghost pronoun. It's a silent killer in academic writing, isn't it?
It creates massive confusion, and the tragic part is that the writer usually has no idea they've made a mistake because the sentence makes perfect sense inside their own head.
Walk us through the mechanics of a ghost pronoun.
It almost always involves the careless use of the word this or that. The grammatical function of a pronoun is to replace a noun to save time and avoid repetition.
But a ghost pronoun occurs when you use the word this, but you leave it completely unattached.
The antecedent, the specific noun that this is supposed to refer to, is either buried, unclear, or entirely invisible.
The example from the source is brilliant. Let's look at it. The local government raised taxes and severely cut funding for public schools. This caused a riot.
When a grader who is reading quickly hits that sentence, they immediately stumble.
They have to ask themselves, what exactly caused the riot? Was it the raising of the taxes? Or was it the cutting of the school funding? Or was it the combination of both events?
Because the word this is sitting there all alone, it is a ghost. It refers to nothing specific. The structural integrity of the argument dissolves into ambiguity.
I realize I do this all the time in fast-paced corporate emails.
Oh, it's so common in emails.
I'll send a message outlining 3 different software bugs, a client complaint, and a missed deadline, and then I'll end the email by just saying, this is unacceptable and needs to be fixed today.
And your team is left staring at the screen, wondering which of the 5 things is the unacceptable part they're supposed to fix.
Exactly. So what is the ironclad rule to exercise the ghost pronoun?
The structural rule is unyielding. Never leave the word this or that alone at the beginning of a sentence. It must never stand by itself.
You must always attach a summary noun to it.
A summary noun. So taking our riot example.
Instead of saying, this caused a riot, you force yourself to attach a noun that summarizes the specific previous thought you want to highlight.
You're right. This drastic economic policy caused a riot.
Or if you want to focus on the schools, you write, this reduction in educational funding caused a riot.
By attaching the noun, you materialize the ghost. You lock the logic together so tightly that no reader, no matter how exhausted they are, can misunderstand your point.
This drastic economic policy that is so incredibly satisfying to read, it just snaps everything into a tight, focused resolution.
It is the mortar curing perfectly between 2 bricks. It ensures the wall holds weight.
Okay, this brings us to a structural flaw that sounds genuinely terrifying, and it's one driven by sheer academic hubris. The run-on monster.
We see the run-on monster constantly with advanced learners, and it is almost always a symptom of overconfidence.
A student will write a single suffocating sentence that is 60, 70, sometimes 80 words long.
It is packed to the brim with 5 commas, 3 semicolons, a couple of em dashes, but absolutely 0 periods.
I have a theory about this. Does this stem from a misunderstanding of what advanced grammar actually looks like historically?
What do you mean?
Well, because if you go back and read classic literature, or 18th century philosophers, or dense political texts from the 1800s, they write in these massive, labyrinthine, paragraph-long sentences. Are modern students just trying to mimic that old-school, highly verbose academic style?
That is precisely the psychological root of the problem. Students mistakenly equate grammatical complexity with high intelligence.
They think that if they use 4 semicolons in one breath, and subordinate clause after subordinate clause, the grader will be dazzled by their sheer intellectual capacity.
But modern academic English has evolved significantly. Today, clarity is the ultimate metric of intelligence.
The working memory of a reader can only hold so much information at once.
A sentence that is 70 words long isn't impressive. It is just a monster that suffocates the reader's comprehension.
It is like trying to build a wall, using one giant, unwieldy, oddly shaped boulder instead of a series of neatly stacked, manageable bricks. It is inherently unstable.
So what is the fix for the advanced learner who wants to demonstrate their high-level grammar without accidentally creating a monster?
A true C2 level writer demonstrates their mastery not through endless complexity, but through rhythm.
Yes, rhythm. It is about mixing sentence lengths to control the reader's pace.
The fix is to follow a complex, theoretical, slightly longer sentence with a short, highly punchy definitive sentence to drive the core point home.
Contrast is what makes writing powerful.
Contrast. The short sentence acts as an anchor.
And the ultimate practical rule of thumb the source provides for catching these monsters before you submit the essay is brilliant. Read your essay out loud in your head.
Listen to the cadence.
If you run out of breath reading a single sentence in your mind, the sentence is too long. Put a period in it. Chop the monster in half.
That brings us to the final sin of the structure and cohesion category. We have reached the end of the essay, and we encounter the echo chamber conclusion.
The echo chamber. Imagine standing in a massive dark cave. You shout out your introductory paragraph, and the exact same words just bounce off the walls and echo back to you at the very end of the essay, completely unchanged.
That is the phenomenon where a student literally just copy-pastes their introduction, maybe swaps out 2 synonyms, slaps it at the bottom of the page, and calls it a conclusion.
Yes, and it is a massive structural failure and a tragic waste of an opportunity.
Because an introduction and a conclusion serve 2 fundamentally different structural purposes in the architecture of an essay. They are not interchangeable.
So if the introduction is the front door meant to present the thesis and outline the argument, what is the conclusion supposed to do? What is its structural purpose?
The expert distinction here is the profound difference between repeating and synthesizing.
A weak conclusion simply repeats what was already said. It is redundant.
A masterful conclusion synthesizes the information. You want to summarize your main points, of course, but you must do it using entirely new vocabulary that reflects the journey the reader has just taken.
And more importantly, you must leave the reader with something new to chew on.
The source calls it providing a food for thought sentence.
Exactly. Your final sentence should zoom out. It should address the broader future implications of the topic you just spent 300 words dissecting.
If you wrote an essay analyzing the impact of automation in the manufacturing workplace, your conclusion shouldn't just echo, automation impacts the workplace.
It should end with a provocative thought about how this automation might evolve in the next decade, or how it might necessitate a radical shift in how we retrain the next generation of workers.
It shows the grader that your logic extends beyond the margins of the paper into the real world.
So we have audited our bricks, we have mixed and applied our mortar, and we have built the walls of our essay.
We have covered vocabulary and structure. But as we move into the third and final phase of our deep dive, we have to face a harsh, undeniable reality about building a house.
You can have the most beautiful, expensive bricks in the world. You can have the most structurally sound walls, expertly mortared together.
But if you build your house on your neighbor's property line, or if you completely ignore the city's zoning laws and the architect's blueprint, the city inspector is still going to condemn the building.
That is a perfect encapsulation of our final category, the sins of logic and task execution.
This section is all about the overarching architecture. It is about understanding, respecting, and answering the specific, rigid demands of the exam prompts themselves.
Because if you violate the fundamental rules of the task, all your beautiful vocabulary and flawless grammar are entirely worthless.
You have to play the game by their rules. And let's start with a flaw that is specific to the independent writing task on these exams. A flaw that ruins countless otherwise brilliant essays.
The fence sitter.
The fence sitter. In the independent task, the prompt almost always asks you to choose a side on a highly debatable topic.
For example, a classic prompt might be, do you prefer living in a bustling city or the quiet countryside?
Describe a fence sitter in this scenario.
A fence sitter is a student who is desperate to be diplomatic. They refuse to make a definitive choice.
They will write a perfectly grammatical, beautifully structured essay stating, well, the city is very beneficial because of the abundance of career opportunities, but the countryside is also incredibly valuable because of the fresh air and low stress. Both have valid points, and I like both equally.
They write a balanced, nuanced observation. And what does the grader do when they read that perfectly balanced observation?
They fail the essay immediately.
Because the student has fundamentally failed the task prompt. The prompt does not want a neutral diplomatic observation. It demands an argument. It demands conflict and a forceful resolution.
But wait, what if the student honestly, genuinely likes both the city and the country equally?
What if they are naturally a moderate person who sees both sides of every issue?
How do we fix this for them?
The fix is blunt. It does not matter what you believe in real life.
The exam is not a polygraph test of your deeply held personal convictions. It is an exercise in persuasive logic.
You must cross the Rubicon. You have to pick a side, even if you have to flip a coin in your head, and you must violently and passionately defend it for the next 300 words. You must take a definitive stance.
You have to play a role. You are a defense attorney assigned to a client. It doesn't matter if you personally like the client. Your job is to build the most aggressive, bulletproof case possible to defend them.
That is exactly right. You acknowledge the other side briefly to show you aren't ignorant, but you plant your flag firmly on one side of the fence.
You're right. While the city undoubtedly offers certain economic advantages, the profound psychological benefits of the countryside make it a vastly superior environment.
You are demonstrating your ability to construct a persuasive argument. That is the architecture they are grading.
Okay, the next two architectural flaws are deeply intertwined, and they both revolve around a very specific beast, the integrated writing task.
For any listeners who might not be intimately familiar with the TOEFL or IELTS, let me quickly explain the mechanics of the integrated task, because the physical setup of the test itself is what causes these flaws.
The user experience of the test dictates the mistakes.
Exactly. In the integrated task, you are first given a short, dense academic passage to read on your computer screen. You have a few minutes to read it.
Then the text disappears, you put on your headphones, and you listen to an audio lecture from a professor about that exact same topic.
The catch, the massive stressful catch, is that the audio lecture is only played once. You cannot rewind it.
After the audio finishes, the reading passage magically reappears on your screen, and it stays visible the entire time you are writing your essay.
And that specific engineered testing environment The permanent, comforting reading passage sitting on the screen versus the fleeting, one-time audio lecture that only exists in your hasty notes creates a massive psychological trap for the test taker.
Which leads directly to our next flaw, the orphaned quote.
The orphaned quote. What exactly is happening in the student's mind here?
The student is in a state of panic. They know they need to write a complex essay, and they look at that reading passage that is safely, permanently sitting right there on the left side of their monitor.
It feels like a life raft.
So they pull a random, complex fact from the reading text, and they just drop it into their essay to take up space and look smart.
But they never connect that text fact to anything the professor said in the audio lecture. The quote is just sitting there in the paragraph completely alone. It is orphaned.
And why is that a fatal architectural failure? It's a true fact from the provided material, right?
It is a failure because the integrated task is not a summary task. It is entirely about relationships. It is a synthesis task.
The prompt isn't asking you to prove you can copy text from the screen. It is specifically asking you to demonstrate how the audio lecture responds to, challenges, or refutes the reading passage.
So the architectural fix is that every single time you mention a fact from the text, it must be immediately paired with the lecture's response. They have to be prominently tethered together.
Yes, they are a binary star system. One cannot exist without the other in this essay.
The source material explains the formula perfectly. You write, the author of the text postulates that the ancient civilization collapsed due to a severe, prolonged drought. However, the lecturer explicitly refutes this claim by providing geological evidence of a massive volcanic eruption.
Every point from the reading must be immediately neutralized by the lecturer's counterpoint.
Which leads directly into the sister flaw, the next major collapse, ignoring the lecture.
This is purely the psychology of panic taking over the steering wheel.
The student is sitting there, maybe they zoned out for 10 seconds during the audio, or their note-taking skills weren't fast enough, and they missed a key point from the professor.
So they lean entirely on the life raft. They lean on the text that is still glowing on the screen.
They end up writing a 250-word essay where 200 words are just summarizing the reading passage, and only 50 words loosely mention the audio lecture.
They are clinging to the safety of the visible text because it is guaranteed to be accurate. But you were saying that is a trap.
It is the ultimate trap designed by the test makers. The source notes an explicit, hard-coded rule from the exam creators themselves. The highest scores always, unequivocally, go to the students who focus primarily on summarizing the listening passage.
The audio lecture is the star of the show.
The reading passage is only there to provide brief background context so you understand what the professor is arguing against. If you ignore the lecture, you have ignored the entire blueprint of the task.
You have to trust your notes, brave the uncertainty of your memory, and focus on the audio.
Okay, moving on to our second to last flaw, and this one is fascinating because it is a desperate attempt to create authority out of thin air.
The fabricated statistic.
The fabricated statistic. This happens when a student is writing an argument, they feel their logic is a bit flimsy, and they decide they need hard evidence.
But they don't have any.
So they just invent highly specific, completely fake data to support their point. They will write a sentence like, according to a comprehensive 2023 study published by Harvard University, 87.4% of climate scientists agree that this policy will reduce emissions.
Okay, let's unpack the psychology here.
Yeah.
Why do intelligent students do this?
Yeah.
Do they just feel like their own logical, deductive reasoning isn't academic enough unless it is backed up by hard math and decimal points?
Yes, it stems entirely from a desperation to sound authoritative. We are conditioned to believe that numbers equal undeniable, objective proof.
But if we zoom out and look at the reality of the situation, it is an absurd strategy.
The grader knows exactly what environment you are in. They know you are sitting in a locked, sterile testing center.
They know you do not have a smartphone, you do not have internet access, you are not sitting in a university library, and you certainly didn't happen to memorize the exact 87.4% decimal point of a random 2023 Harvard study before walking into the room.
Right. It is incredibly transparent. It's like a child claiming their uncle works at Nintendo to win an argument on the playground.
It is entirely transparent, it looks desperate, and it destroys your academic credibility with the grader immediately. It shows that you rely on gimmicks rather than sound reasoning.
So if you are writing an essay and you want to support an argument, but you are in a locked room and you don't actually have any real statistics memorized, what is the architectural fix? How do you sound authoritative and prove your point without resorting to fake numbers?
You rely on generalized societal observations, broad consensus, or hypothetical logical pathways.
Instead of faking a specific study, you use a broader yet still highly academic framing device. The source provides a great template for this. A growing consensus among educational psychologists suggests that.
A growing consensus. I really like that. It invokes the weight of authority and expert opinion without tying you to a fake, verifiable number.
Exactly. It is academically sound. You can also lean heavily into hypothetical logic to prove your point. You write, if a society prioritizes early childhood reading programs, it logically follows that long-term literacy rates will stabilize.
You are using the power of your own brain to build an undeniable causal chain, rather than hiding behind a fabricated statistic.
Which brings us to our very last fatal flaw. And this one is almost the exact opposite of the fabricated statistic.
Instead of cold, fake data, it is an overwhelming flood of personal truth. It is the overly personal tangent.
The overly personal tangent. Now, to be fair to the students, in the independent essay, the prompt instructions often explicitly state that you are allowed to use personal examples and experiences to support your argument.
But some students take this minor permission and they absolutely run wild with it. They abandon the academic structure completely and turn their essay into a deeply emotional memoir.
The example highlighted in the source is quite funny, but also a bit tragic. A student is trying to write an essay proving the thesis that teamwork is important in overcoming adversity.
And instead of constructing an academic argument, they write, for example, when I was 7 years old, my favorite golden retriever ran away during a terrible thunderstorm. I was crying, and my brother and I had to grab our flashlights and search for him in the freezing rain for 3 hours.
And they proceed to spend 150 words telling this highly detailed cinematic childhood story.
It is a touching story, and I'm sure the grader was happy they found the dog, but it has completely derailed the essay.
You have abandoned the academic tone entirely. You are no longer writing an analytical piece of persuasive logic. You are writing a creative writing assignment for a middle school English class.
So how do we use personal examples correctly? Because as you said, the prompt does allow them, and sometimes a personal anecdote really is the best way to illustrate a complex point. How do we fix this tangent?
Personal examples are powerful tools, but they must be governed by 3 strict rules. They must be brief, they must be highly relevant, and they must maintain a sterile academic tone.
You have to ruthlessly edit your own life. You condense the entire sprawling story into, at most, 2 sentences, and then you immediately tie it directly back to your core academic thesis.
You have to keep it strictly professional.
Incredibly professional. Instead of the emotional cinematic dog story in the rain, the source suggests extracting the core lesson and writing something like H. My personal experience managing a complex, high-stakes university coding project perfectly illustrates how vital clear communication is to effective teamwork under pressure.
You acknowledge the personal experience, but you extract the academic universal lesson from it and immediately move on to your analysis. You do not get lost in the emotional weeds of your own memory.
Wow. Okay, we've covered an immense amount of ground today. From surgically dismantling the chaos of the thesaurus salad all the way to exposing the desperation of the fabricated statistic.
We have audited the bricks, we have mixed the mortar, and we have reviewed the overarching architecture.
It has been a comprehensive micro-to-macro journey through the anatomy of a failing essay. And I think this deep dive reiterates the central, most vital thesis from our source material today. Avoiding these 15 specific flaws is what will truly make your writing bulletproof.
Success in these high-stakes environments is not about memorizing the most obscure words in the English dictionary to show off. It is about absolute, unyielding structural discipline.
So to you, the listener, I want to pose a direct question as we start to wrap this up. As we went through this deep dive today, listening to these flaws, which of these mistakes made you wince a little bit?
Which one are you most guilty of when you sit down at a keyboard?
Are you someone who struggles with the run-on monster? Do you find yourself writing massive sentences that leave you breathless?
Or maybe you are a chronic fence-sitter, always trying to see both sides of every argument and refusing to make a hard, definitive claim.
Or perhaps you have unleashed a ghost pronoun or two in your time, sending off messages that leave your readers completely baffled as to what exactly this is referring to.
Acknowledging the habit is the very first step to fixing it. You have to clearly recognize the crack in your own foundation before you can pour the new mortar.
And as we close this out, I want to leave you with a final, broader thought to mull over. Our entire discussion today, guided by the source material, has been intensely focused on the mechanics of beating exhausted exam graders in highly controlled, artificial academic settings like the TOEFL or the IELTS.
But I want you to consider how these 15 fatal flaws manifest far beyond the sterile walls of a testing room. Think about your daily, real-world professional life.
Oh, that is a really fascinating pivot.
How often do we see the sour salads in corporate emails, where a colleague is trying just a little too hard to sound authoritative and ends up sounding ridiculous?
Or how often do we read a 50-page quarterly report filled with agonizing fluff just to hide a fundamental lack of real, actionable data?
Or sit through a PowerPoint presentation plagued by invisible transitions that leave the entire boardroom confused about how we got from slide A to slide B?
If you take these strict academic fixes and start applying them to your everyday professional communication, if you tighten up your structural mortar, if you hedge your absolute statements, if you exercise your ghost pronouns, how might that fundamentally change the way your intelligence, your clarity, and your overall competence are perceived by your peers and your bosses?
That is an incredibly powerful takeaway. The lessons here are universal. It is not just about passing a gatekeeping exam. It is about mastering the architecture of your own thoughts so that when you build an argument, it stands the test of time.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep practicing your structural mortar. Always remember to hedge your absolutes and stay curious. We will catch you next time. Think about the last time you completely forgot to do something really important.
Oh, like missing a deadline or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you forgot to pick up your kid from practice. When you finally had to explain yourself, you probably didn't say, my neural pathways failed to retrieve that data.
Right. That would sound totally robotic.
Exactly. You probably just said, it just slipped my mind. You offered this simple, functional apology. But, and this is wild neurologically and linguistically, what you actually just did was blame your own brain for dropping a wet piece of soap.
Yeah, it's like you cleverly made yourself the victim of this frictionless thought.
Right. And welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. We are spending our time today unpacking two just incredibly detailed linguistic transcripts that break down the advanced vocabulary of time and memory.
And the mission here is really to uncover how these seemingly boring phrases that you use every single day to talk about, remembering something or rushing around, how they're actually these deeply visceral metaphors.
Yeah, we're talking about imagery pulled from, like, archaeology, medieval banking acoustics, optical physics, and even hand-to-hand combat.
Exactly. And to be clear, we aren't doing some dry grammar breakdown here. The analysis in these transcripts reveals how we conceptualize our own existence.
Right, our internal mental landscapes.
Yeah, and ultimately our mortality, because, human beings aren't just biological hard drives storing raw data. We are these emotional, physical creatures who are just desperately trying to make sense of the passage of time.
So let's start with how we look backward. It is just fascinating how we physically conceptualize the entirely abstract act of remembering.
Right, because you can't actually see a memory.
No, you can't touch a thought. So to make sense of our own brains, we treat the mind as a physical space. We imagine this massive, sprawling, complicated archive.
We have to spatialize it. I mean, if the brain is a physical room or like a vast library, then the act of retrieving a memory transforms from this mysterious biological firing of synapses into a tangible physical action. Consider a phrase we use constantly, right? Jog your memory.
Oh, yeah. We toss that out so casually. Like, you lose your keys, you retrace your steps to jog your memory. But the actual verb, to jog, it carries so much physical weight.
It really does. Obviously, we think of the athletic metaphor first, like a slow, rhythmic style of running.
Sure.
But historically, the transcripts point out that the verb to jog originally meant to lightly bump or shake or nudge something.
Okay, so you're literally describing the act of giving your own brain a gentle physical shake.
Exactly. You're assuming the memory is just dormant, like it's sitting lightly on a shelf in that mental archive, maybe a little dusty, just asleep.
Right, so you encounter an external clue, maybe you smell a specific brand of perfume, or, I don't know, you hear a song from high school.
Yeah, and that sensory input physically bumps the memory awake. It's a very low-stakes physical interaction.
But the terrain of the mind isn't all, shallow shelves. That is where the language shifts pretty dramatically in the transcripts. When a memory isn't just lightly sleeping, when it's buried deep down in the dark, we have to unearth it.
Oh, yeah. That is pure archaeology. We aren't ludging anything anymore at that point.
No, unearthing implies real, heavy labor.
Right.
Earth, in this context, isn't like the globe, right? It is the literal dirt, the compacted soil of the ground.
Right. So when you are forcing yourself to recall some deeply repressed event, or you're trying to piece together the blurry details of your early childhood, you are no longer taking a casual stroll through an archive.
You have picked up a metaphorical shovel.
Yes. You are on your hands and knees with, like, an archaeologist's brush.
Scraping away decades of psychological sediment. I love that imagery. You're digging into the mud of your subconscious to pull some ancient, fragile treasure back up to the surface. It implies this huge struggle,
A deliberate, exhausting effort to reclaim something that time tried to bury forever.
Yeah, and contrast the fragility of unearthing an old artifact with the phrase we use for our most permanent, unshakable memories.
Right.
When we say something is etched in your mind.
Oh, that contrast is stunning.
Right, because unearthing feels like going up into a forgotten attic and finding an old, dusty diary.
Yeah.
You pull it out, you gently wipe off the grime, the pages might be torn.
Mm-hmm.
It's delicate.
Very delicate.
But when you tell someone that a specific moment is etched in your mind, that feels like a permanent psychological tattoo.
Yeah.
Like you cannot wash it off no matter how hard you scrub.
And that permanence is exactly the point. Etching is a brutal, sculptural, and chemical metaphor.
Wait, chemical?
Yeah, because the actual artistic process of etching doesn't just involve drawing on a surface. It involves coating solid glass or stone and then using a fiercely strong acid.
Oh, wow.
Or a very sharp heavy metal tool to cut a design deeply into that rigid material.
So the memory literally carves into your architecture.
Exactly. When you experience something that is either profoundly traumatic or incredibly beautiful, you're telling the world that the psychological impact was so violent, so intense, that the image chemically burned itself into your brain.
The acid bit into the glass.
Right. It is flawlessly and permanently there, and you are entirely powerless to erase it.
Okay, but if we follow that thread of permanence, it leads us to this really fascinating paradox that the transcripts get into. We have established this incredibly tactile physical archive, right? We're shaking things awake, we're digging through dirt, we're carving into solid stone with acid. You would assume an archive built with such heavy physical materials would be perfectly reliable.
You would assume that, yeah.
Right.
But human memory is famously completely flawed.
So flawed. We are not video cameras objectively recording facts on a hard drive. We are highly subjective, emotional editors of our own lives.
We really are. We constantly distort the past, or we just lose it into the void entirely.
And the everyday language we use to describe this distortion is just remarkably sophisticated.
It is. Take the most famous idiom for nostalgic distortion, looking at the past through rose-tinted glasses.
Ah, yeah. It's a brilliant optical metaphor.
It really is. We are admitting that we are voluntarily putting on a pair of sunglasses where the glass lenses are dyed a soft, rosy pink color.
So we take a harsh, gray, potentially very ugly reality, and by looking through these dyed lenses, everything is artificially bathed in a warm cinematic light.
Exactly. It's a willing self-deception. When we say someone is wearing rose-tinted glasses, we are acknowledging that they're actively ignoring the negative facts.
They're choosing to remember a relationship or a time in their life as being significantly happier and more perfect than the historical reality actually was.
Right. We color correct our own trauma just to make it bearable.
We curate the past to protect ourselves in the present. And, we don't just do it individually, we do it collectively, too.
Yeah.
Think about the phrase, taking a trip down memory lane.
Oh, yeah. It's such a gentle, inviting image.
It is. And geographically speaking, a lane is a very specific type of infrastructure. It is not a bustling, chaotic, multi-lane highway filled with aggressive traffic and danger.
No, not at all. A lane is a narrow, quiet, often rural road. It implies safety, slow movement, and scenic surroundings.
So when you sit around a fire with old college friends and take that trip down memory lane, you are deliberately choosing to avoid the stressful highways of your shared past.
The arguments, the failures, the stress, you avoid all of it.
You decide to walk together down this quiet, manicured path of purely sentimental, highly positive reflection.
But nostalgia doesn't always wait for you to take a deliberate stroll. Sometimes it invades your present violently, completely uninvited.
Oh, right. That is when we experience a blast from the past.
Yeah, and the emotional whiplash between a lane and a blast is severe. A blast is a kinetic, explosive metaphor.
It is a sudden shockwave.
Exactly. Visualize a literal explosion, a wall of compressed air, or the sudden, deafening blare of a massive trumpet right next to your ear.
Just totally jarring.
Right. So when an old friend you haven't spoken to in 20 years suddenly calls you, or you uncover a deeply painful photograph by accident, the nostalgia doesn't slowly wash over you like a gentle tide.
It hits you with the concussive force of a shockwave. It completely destabilizes you.
It does. We have these powerful metaphors for how memories hit us or how we distort them, but the linguistic landscape gets arguably even more interesting when the mental archive just completely fails us.
Yeah, the language of forgetting is just as sensory as the language of remembering. Like, for instance, when a name or a face rings a bell.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. This relies entirely on acoustics, specifically the behavior of sound in poor visibility.
The transcripts describe this as imagining a large, heavy bell hanging far away in an incredibly thick pea soup fog.
Yes. You hear this faint, distant ringing sound echoing through the mist.
And you know the sound is real.
Yeah.
You are certain the bell exists out there in the distance.
Right. You have the audio confirmation, but you entirely lack the visual data. You can't see the shape of the bell. You don't know what building it's attached to.
So when you tell a coworker that their weird story rings a bell, you are articulating a very specific neurological state.
You're saying, my brain has triggered a faint, incomplete recognition. The tone is echoing, but the image is totally lost in the fog.
Which brings us right back to the moment we started with today, when the memory doesn't just hide in the fog, but vanishes from your grip entirely.
Yes, when you forget to do a crucial task and you claim it slipped your mind.
We are back to the physical, friction-based metaphors. You're trying to hold on to a thought, but the thought itself is behaving like a wet piece of soap.
Or a frantic, slippery fish.
Okay, wait, I'm not letting us off the hook that easily. Slip my mind is an absolute cop-out of an idiom.
It totally is.
Think about the audacity of this craze. You failed to execute a basic responsibility. And instead of owning the failure and saying, I lack the discipline to retain that information, you say, it slipped my mind.
You're removing your own agency entirely.
Exactly. You are blaming the thought for lacking sufficient friction. Like, I tried to hold on to the soap, boss, but the soap was just too wet.
It is the ultimate polite abdication of responsibility. The language itself frames you as the helpless victim of a rogue, frictionless idea.
It perfectly illustrates how we use language to comfort ourselves, to smooth over our own cognitive failures when we're looking backward at our mistakes.
Yeah, and this is key, the luxury of looking backward, of making excuses for dropped soap, that vanishes the second we turn around.
Right. The transcripts highlight this massive, jarring shift in the tone of our language when we stop looking backward at memory and start looking forward at time.
Because the past is largely a safe, closed system. It's already written.
You can afford to wander down quiet lanes or look through pink glasses.
Exactly. But the future is an open, high-stakes, terrifying necessity.
Time is no longer a passive archive where we can casually dig around with little archaeological brushes. When we talk about deadlines in the future, time transforms into an active, aggressive predator.
The psychological shift is profound. The moment we start talking about the future, our language instantly strips away all those soft geographic terms.
It becomes mechanical, frantic, athletic, and tied directly to base survival.
Let's look at the ultimate symbol of that modern anxiety, right? Finding yourself in a race against the clock.
Man, just hearing that makes my heart rate go up. It is an athletic metaphor, but it is deeply unfair.
It's completely unfair. In a normal foot race, you are competing against another biological organism.
Right, another human being who will eventually fatigue or cramp up or just need to breathe.
But in this metaphor, your competitor is the tireless, unstoppable, utterly unfeeling mechanical hand of the clock.
You are frantically sprinting against a machine that does not negotiate and never pauses. It is basically the anxiety of the Industrial Revolution baked into a single phrase.
It is. And if you somehow manage to win that desperate sprint, you succeed in the nick of time.
Okay, the historical origins of this phrase in the transcript are incredible. It brings us into the world of medieval woodworking and ancient finance.
Yeah, centuries before digital calendars or, paper ledgers were common, ordinary people kept track of financial debts and the passage of time using a literal wooden stick.
A tally stick. Right.
Exactly, a tally stick. You would take a knife and cut tiny, precise scratches into the wood.
And those tiny scratches or grooves were called nicks.
Right. Each individual nick marked a highly specific measure of debt owed, or a specific day that a payment was due. The debtor and the creditor would actually split the stick to prevent fraud.
That is so smart. So to arise and pay your debt in the nick literally meant you arrived precisely on that specific tiny carved mark on the wood.
Yes. So when you submit a massive project to your client in the nick of time today, you're evoking this ancient physical act.
You are saying you arrived at the exact final microsecond, right on the groove of the wood, before financial or professional disaster struck.
And there's another phrase that captures that exact same flavor of extreme high-stakes urgency, completing a task at the 11th hour.
Oh yeah, we use this to describe pure panic, extreme procrastination.
Definitely. But the origins go back much further than medieval tally sticks. This is actually ancient biblical language.
Right. It originates from the parable of the workers in the vineyard, because in the ancient world, the workday was strictly measured as 12 hours of daylight, from sunrise to sunset.
Yeah, there was no artificial lighting to keep working into the night. So the 11th hour is that final, desperate, fading hour of the day.
The shadows are incredibly long. The sun is actively going down. The temperature is dropping.
If you are starting a critical task at the 11th hour, you have waited until the absolute last sliver of daylight.
It represents acting only when the threat of total darkness is imminent. It's pure survival mode.
And this escalating sense of panic builds perfectly into the final theme explored in the transcripts. It examines the seemingly futile ways humans try to manipulate this unstoppable force of time.
And the language we use to cope with the fact that time ultimately defeats us anyway.
Right. We spend so much energy trying to bend time to our will.
Like when time is moving terrifyingly fast, we borrow from biology. We say it happened in the blink of an eye.
Because blinking is the involuntary closing and opening of the human eyelid. It takes roughly 1/10 of a second.
Which is insanely fast.
It is the absolute fastest voluntary or involuntary movement the human body is capable of executing.
So we take our own biological speed limit, a fraction of a second, and we apply it to massive expanses of time. We say, my children grew up in the blink of an eye.
We use it to articulate the dizzying, disorienting evaporation of years.
But think about the flip side of that. What happens when time isn't evaporating but stretching out endlessly in front of us? We resort to actual violence. We decide to kill time.
It is an incredibly aggressive metaphor for boredom, if you think about it.
It really is. You're sitting in an airport terminal, your flight is delayed for 3 hours, and suddenly those empty minutes become a hostile entity.
They become an enemy that must be destroyed.
Yeah. You pull out your phone, you scroll through social media, you played a game, you are waging a literal war on the clock.
You are actively attempting to murder the empty space because sitting in the silence of time passing is just too uncomfortable.
Right. And alternatively, if you aren't trying to murder time, you might be using your own body weight to resist its forward momentum by dragging your feet.
Which brings us back to the friction metaphors. But it's the exact opposite of the slippery wet soap we talked about earlier.
Yeah, with the soap, the thought had no friction, so it escaped you. Here, you're intentionally trying to create maximum friction.
Exactly. Picture a stubborn, reluctant child walking on a concrete sidewalk wearing heavy rubber-soled shoes.
Oh, I know that walk.
Right.
They don't want to go to the dentist.
Right. So they refuse to pick up their legs. They let the rubber drag loudly and heavily against the pavement, physically fighting the forward momentum of their parents.
So when you drag your feet on making a tough decision at work, you are that child. You're trying to use the metaphorical weight of your own body to slow down the inevitable march of time.
Well, the concrete always wins. The inevitable always arrives.
Which brings us to what I found to be the most profound and, frankly, chilling imagery in the entire deep dive: the sands of time.
It is a deeply poetic metaphor. It's rooted heavily in the medieval world, based on the physical mechanism of the hourglass.
Right. 2 glass bulbs connected by a tiny narrow neck filled with fine sand.
And the moment that hourglass is turned over, gravity takes absolute, unquestionable control.
You cannot bargain with gravity.
No, and you cannot stop the sand from falling. You can't plug the hole.
Every single microscopic grain of sand that drops into the bottom bulb is a second of your existence slipping away into the past.
It represents the cold, unstoppable erasure of history. The phrase reminds us that even the greatest, most powerful empires eventually vanish beneath those shifting, uncaring sands.
Wow. Which brings us to the absolute terrifying conclusion of the hourglass. What happens when you look at the top bulb and you are almost entirely out of sand? You are living on borrowed time.
Yeah, this is the ultimate synthesis of survival and finance. In this linguistic scenario, fate or death is no longer an hourglass. Fate operates as a bank.
A very strict creditor.
Exactly. Say you survived a terrible car crash, or your failing business received a miracle emergency loan at the 11th hour. You are still breathing. You are still operating.
But the language explicitly warns you that the time you are currently spending does not actually belong to you. It isn't your property.
You borrowed it from the bank of fate. You are in existential debt.
And eventually, inevitably, the bank will knock on your door to collect exactly what is owed.
It always does.
I just have to step back and ask the big philosophical question here. Why do we do this?
Do what exactly?
Why do humans consistently resort to such violent, frantic, or debt-based language to describe something like the passage of time? The sun rising and setting is literally the most natural, predictable, inevitable process in the universe. It's just physics.
That's a great point.
Right. Yeah. Why on earth are we framing our daily lives as a combat zone where we have to kill minutes, or as a loan shark we owe borrowed time to?
Honestly, it reveals our desperate, fundamental psychological need for control.
Control. Over time.
Yeah. We cannot control the physical reality of time moving forward. We can't stop aging. But by linguistically framing time as an enemy we can kill, or a debt we can carefully borrow and manage, we create this powerful psychological illusion.
Oh, I see. We convince ourselves that we are active, negotiating participants in this transaction, rather than just passive, helpless subjects to the laws of physics.
Exactly. We personify time, giving it a face and a motive so we can fight it, even though we know, deep down, it's a fight we will ultimately lose.
Wow. That is an incredibly heavy realization. But it clarifies so much about how we operate. We have traveled a massive psychological distance today.
We really have.
We started this deep dive down in the dirt, unearthing buried mental treasures with our little archaeological brushes in the quiet, dusty archives of our minds. And we ended up sprinting against machines and frantically trying to pay off existential debts to the bank of fate.
We charted the journey from the cozy, protective illusions of the past directly into the relentless, high-pressure machinery of the future.
And the main takeaway for you, listening to this, is to realize that these idioms aren't just quirky vocabulary trivia to bring up at a dinner party.
No, they are powerful, active tools.
Right. These phrases are the actual mechanisms we use to articulate the deepest points of our souls, our hidden anxieties, and the shared, terrifying, beautiful human condition.
The metaphors you choose to speak are actively shaping the reality you experience.
Which leaves me with one final provocative thought I want you to mull over after we wrap up today. We've seen how our language actively encourages us to view the past through rose-tinted glasses, constantly romanticizing and softening what is already gone. And we've seen how our language treats the future as a desperate, frantic race against a ticking clock or a looming heavy debt we have to repay.
So the past is a comfort and the future is a threat.
Right. So if these deeply ingrained linguistic habits are constantly operating in the background of your mind, pulling you backward into the warm embrace of nostalgia, or aggressively pushing you forward into a state of panic about deadlines, how incredibly difficult does that make it for us to simply exist in the present moment?
Wow. Yeah, it is incredibly hard to stand still when your vocabulary is always running.
Exactly. I invite you to pay attention to the words coming out of your mouth tomorrow. Consider how your own language, the casual idioms you throw around every single day, might be making it nearly impossible for you to just sit still and experience the now.
That's a powerful thing to reflect on.
It really is. Because at the end of the day, these phrases aren't just simple functional tools. They are intricate psychological artifacts. And the deeper you dig into the muddy, complex waters of the English language, the more you realize that every word you speak is carving a permanent etching into the way you experience your own life. Thanks for taking this trip down memory lane with us. Catch you on the next deep dive.